Hi, welcome to the next part of the Dana build. Now, as you can see, it looks a little bit different. So the main chassis sat here and the turret is just sat over there. There appears to be some colour on it. Now, it was an old can of, I can't remember what it was called now, olive grey I think it was called, or army grey or whatever, or olive green or whatever. But the idea behind it was this. If I can get a lighter colour on it and then sand it back, I can actually see where the imperfections are in the metal. Now, you can do that with light primers and whatever, but I just thought, I've got the paint. I know it's going to work with the paint that the final paint that I'm going to use. So I thought, well, I'm not going to use the can for anything else. So let's spray it on and, you know, see what it looks like. Now, there's a few dark spots because what I've done is where I've got the handles here, I've finished them off a little bit with an angle grinder, with a little grinder, just to get the edges a little bit better, where it's very, very difficult sometimes to weld these tiny little pieces onto quite, in effect, what is quite thick metal. So sometimes the finish isn't great, so I've had to finish that off with a little grinder and make that look good. And then obviously give it a coat of etch primer just to let it to bond in. Again, it's probably very, very difficult to see on the camera, but all these panels here are doors, so I've now actually got hinges on the doors. Now, they don't open, there's no need for them to open, but once they've got the handles on, you know, they're going to look like they can open. A few other things that, again, are going to be very difficult to see on the camera. Just on the back of the cab, I've got some old computer aluminium heat sinks, which I've stuck on off some graphics cards. And they're going to look like the coolers on the back of the aircon system for the extraction system for the cab. And then there's a hole over there in the corner on the back there, which I'm in the process of doing, which is actually going to have a real fan. It'll have this mounted on it, a real fan, and that will help keep this area in here where all the electronics are, keep it all cool. Now, it's not necessary that it's kept cool, but I've just found that obviously with all these things, the cooler I can keep them where the electronics are, the more efficient they are, and they just work really, really well. One negative that I've had with this has been the gun system. Now, I've been working on this system to get it all working. I did a couple of test fires. I didn't do them on camera. I will do some more. And the firing mechanism for the 9mm blanks works really, really, really well, and it produces a good amount of smoke. And in a way, the smoke is a little bit more important than the bang. I put a meter on it, and again, I'll do this on camera as well in a week or so you can see. But basically, there's not a massive difference between the 209 blanks and the 9mm blanks. The 9mm's probably got the edge, but not by a lot. So I just need to think about that. But I've got adapters. I can run either 209s or 9mm or 12 gauge if I need to. But I think that might be too much for this because, you know, it just might be too much. That's not where the problem was. The problem has been the recoil. Now, when I designed this, I just thought that instead of the whole mechanism, the whole barrel and breech recoiling, which in hindsight is probably what I now should have done. What I've done is I've designed it so the outer barrel here recoils, this moves. So, and the way that works is on this mechanism here, you can see that there's a slot cut through, and I can then slide this little lever backwards and forwards, and that will give me my recoil. Now, the idea behind that was I was going to attach a solenoid like this, and solenoids simply work by electromagnetic current. You know, when you put current into it, it moves it to that position. When you release the current, the return spring moves it back to that position. That was going to be mounted on basically here, and then this can be triggered by any voltage, which means I can control it through the radio system and simulate the recoil. This is quite a chunky solenoid, and it's got a fair amount of weight, of pressure that it can push, but it can't move this barrel. And that is a bit of a pain. Now, it's not that it can't move it. It's the problem with all of these solenoids is they can't have any initial resistance. So any initial resistance on here will stop the electromagnet engaging properly, and so they're all like it really. But this one in particular, it looks chunky, but it's not quite doing what I want it to do, and I can't really find one that's more powerful. So I'm back to the drawing board a little bit on the recoil. The idea simply was to mount this on here and then do the recoil, but yeah, bit of a pain really. I might drop the recoil, I might not bother. I've always thought it looks a bit silly on model systems anyway, but I just was toying with the idea of building it, and you know that it would have been nice to build it, but it might be that I can come up with a different system. I mean, on the smaller tanks, on the 1/14th, 1/10th scale small stuff, they simply use servos to control this. So the servo arm, you know, there'd be a servo in here and the arm simply moves backwards and forwards. Now it might be, as you can see, there's not a great deal of resistance. This does flow quite well. It might be that a servo would do what I want it to do. However, in that elevation, I'm going to be asking the servo to do quite a lot. But yeah, I'm not going to give up on it, but it's a bit of a pain that my original idea didn't work. So yeah, it's a shame. It really is a shame, because it was such a simple idea. But as they say, back to the drawing board on that one. So what else? What else? As I said, the main issue is the paint that's gone on, so I can see what all these imperfections look like. I've started to drill or put marks on it where the rivets would be for the panels. And I've done the same on the turret. I'll pan across in a minute and show you what I've done with the turret. Actually, no, I won't. What I'll do is I'll put the turret on the top, and then you can see it all assembled and what it's actually going to look like. I think I'm actually getting to a point where I might be ready for the final coat of primer. Now, again, I'm in two minds about this, whether to use a high build primer on here and take out some of this roughness in the metal, or whether I like the roughness in the metal. It's a fine line between too much and, you know, to scale and all this kind of stuff, and other things. What have I missed? So I've been thinking about, you know, are there any areas that I've missed where I need to be drilling holes here to do this and this and this? Obviously, we're putting lights in. We've got perimeter lights, so they generally sit underneath this sill here. And this is hollow, so the wiring is going to run down the middle of this sill here. So we'll have one perimeter light here, one perimeter light here, possibly one here in the middle. Obviously, we've got the headlights at the front, we've got the brake lights at the back, and then there's individual small little LEDs that are going to be set in certain places. Yeah, oh, the battery box is, you can't, again, it's really difficult to see in there, but there's bracketry in there now, which means the batteries can slide in and they don't slide straight through. And then what I'm going to do is get that to all be foam lined. All of this stuff is. So what I use for the foam lining is this. Bidding! With the modern wonders of camera technology. So, I use this stuff. This is playmat EVA foam, basically. And it's incredibly cheap stuff, this. You know, it's this interlocking thing so you can create these big mats. But it's really, really good to bond to this metal. And then it creates a kind of a cushion, which is incredibly hard wearing. And it will protect things like the batteries. I also use it, it's my secret formula, to line things. Now, this one, not so much. This area will be lined and this area will be lined. But the idea is it takes out that rattliness, that hollowness that you can get with a model that you don't have with the real thing. Difference being, you know, the real thing, the steel on the real thing is incredibly thick. The steel on here is quite thin, so there's that vibration sometimes you can get going over rough ground. with this bonded to the back of this, you can't hear that rattling. So I use this in everything. It's really, really good. Also, it helps insulate in terms of electronics and stuff like that as well. There's no risk of things touching metal surfaces and whatever. I don't use in any of my wiring, I never have done, a common chassis earth. I always use independent wiring systems for the earth and for the libes. So there's a libe system, an earth system that runs through it. I know it takes more wire, but on a model like this, you know, it's neither here nor there. On the real thing, fair enough, but the minute I try to earth to the chassis, you can run into all sorts of issues with models. Anyway, that is it so far. Got to really think about how I'm going to do the recoil. I'm now going to get some of this cut and stuck into, you know. But again, it's one of these things that every time you kind of come back at the moment, you don't seem to be able to see much difference in what's going on. But trust me, there is loads and loads and loads of things that are being added to this. And it's those little details that gradually build up the illusion of the real thing. So I will leave you with a few shots of the turret on and a few detailed shots, and I will see you next time.